So this is review number 5, and we are going to be looking at Islamic art, and then art of the Northern Renaissance. So we are still in content area 3. So when we're talking about Islamic art, one of the things that can be kind of confusing is this is going to refer to not only art that is made for sacred practices, for practices within the Muslim religion. It's also going to refer to art that is made by people who are culturally Islamic, or who practice the Muslim religion, who are Muslim. And so it's a little bit strange, because again, we don't call all art made by someone who's Christian or Catholic, specifically Catholic art. But for Islam, they do. And so just let that be. I know it's a little bit frustrating, but that's kind of how it is. Typically, what we're going to expect to see with Islamic art is art that is made for practices of worship or power and authority. For our purposes, what we typically see. And unfortunately, we didn't get to do this year because of the virus. We didn't get to do content area 7, which is where we would go into a lot more of the Islamic art. All right. Some of the preferences we'll see and that College Board wants to remind you of for Islamic art are going to be an all-over decoration, so really elaborate surfaces or calligraphy, so text as art. We see a lot of what we call vegetal designs, which is a plant-based design like we see in this capital on the top left. And then we do see figurative representation. Now remember, we will only see figures if it is not sacred. So if you see a figure, it has to be an Islamic work that, and it's Islamic, right? It has to be a work that is related to something other than within the confines of a mosque, right? So just keep that in mind. Make sure in case you get a mosque on the exam, make sure you know the parts of a mosque. We've talked about all of these. So the first mosque we looked at was the Great Mosque at Cordoba. This is an Umayyad structure. It was first a mosque, right? In this form, it was first a mosque, and then it becomes a Catholic church. And so probably the most interesting thing about this mosque is the fact that it has a cruciform Latin cross cathedral in the middle of the mosque. And we had the opportunity to go here this last March, a year ago March, and it's just amazing and strange to see the juxtaposition of these two religions and these two sacred spaces coming together. Now, typical of a mosque, there's going to be a courtyard, a place for ablution for the ritual washing. There's going to be separate spaces for male and female. There's going to be minarets, and here the minaret was transformed into a bell tower. And then all of these kind of, I guess, zigzag roof you see going across here, these are all part of the complex hypostyle hall within the mosque. And so remember, hypostyle hall, lots of columns. Here's a view from the side, so you can see the cathedral poking up in the middle of the mosque. The typical mosque decoration from this time period is going to be elaborate. It's going to have mosaics. Again, nothing figurative. You'll see plant designs, things related to calligraphy, text from the Quran, but you're not going to see figures, either animal or human figures. Now, before this was a mosque, way back when, it was a site for a Roman god. And so this is an axis mundi. It's a site, a connection point that for some reason has been considered sacred for a long period of time. But the Umayyads are the ones who really built the structure that remains. Well, the Islamic part of the structure that remains. Horseshoe arch, very typical for the decorative iconography of Islam. So we had the barrel arch, just a simple barrel arch for, well, let's back up even before that. Before that, we had just post and lintel, right? So post and lintel is going to be like your typical doorway. Post and lintel is going to be what we see all the way from kind of the beginning up through the Greeks. Right? And then with the Romans had the barrel arch, right? Looks like an upside down U. And then once we get into medieval, we still have the barrel arch all the way through Romanesque, and then we get to Gothic, and Gothic brings us that pointed arch, okay? And they also bring us the fancy trefoil arch, which you kind of see up here at the top. Okay. And now with Islam, we have the horseshoe. So the horseshoe is like a barrel arch, but the ends come close together. And so it kind of curves back on itself. It's a decorative arch. And then in this case, it's filled with gold. This is actually text from the Quran here around this banner. And then more text. And then this has mosaic, inlaid gold. The complexity is supposed to remind you of the complexity of the universe that Allah has created. The exterior of the building, the oldest parts of the building have more of the traditional Spanish, well, I guess I should say it becomes a Spanish aesthetic, but it comes in from North Africa and then over from Turkey. These pigments to make the ceramic designs of the clay tiles. So you have this kind of cultural influence coming from both North Africa and West Asia. And then the interior of this mosque is spoila from ancient Rome. So the Christians are not the only people that use spoila. The striped, red and white striped double arch hypostyle hall, and so it's this dizzying full like almost overwhelming space. This is what the plan, this one here on the left is what the plan looked like originally, and then the one on the right is what it looked like once they built a cathedral in the middle. So when we talk about symbolism here, with Christians, the symbolism of salvation, about being saved, about becoming a Christian, focuses on one path to salvation, and that path being Jesus. And so we talked about the analysis of this one path down the center. This is the Catholic cathedral, right, in the middle of the mosque. This one path down the center being the path to God. Versus in Islam, there's many paths to God, to Allah, and you find your path. And so the symbolism of all the different paths, if you can find, you're on your own journey. And so it's a different approach to a religious ideal. Oh, pictures from when we were there. All right, the Pyxis. This Pyxis is a coming of age present. This is belonged to Al-Mughira, which is Umayyad. And this Pyxis is definitely coming of age for the prince, right? He is the son of the caliph, but he also, it's about the fact that the Umayyad had been in conflict with, but victorious over the Abbasid. So it has that kind of underlying idea as well. This would have held toiletries. It's made of ivory. It's only 7 inches tall. So we're looking at a small object, but it has these really intricate, tiny carvings. And so for this work, you would really want to think about those themes of luxury, decorative objects, commemorative, coming of age object. This is very typical of the decorative style from this time period. We call these kind of medallion shapes. So it has 4 medallions going on the outside of the cylinder. Those medallions have princely iconography, things that reinforce the right to rule of the Umayyad, right? This is their legacy, their symbolism of their legacy. And then it has text around this register around the top of the lid is text, and it's telling you on this that right here you can see it in italics, God blessings, favors, joy's beatitude. So it's blessing upon him. And then the year, we talked about the year here. This is the a different calendar that they're using in the Islamic world. There it is. It's got little bits of inset jade. Again, this has image, or this has figures because it's not for a sacred use. So we call that iconic. Iconic means has figures, figural representation, and iconic means no human or animal figures. The Alhambra, this is from the Nasser dynasty. It is a Moorish palace. And this is the last, this group of Moors is the last group of Muslims to rule Spain before Charles V and Catholicism are going to sweep. It is a palace. It is a government, seat of government. It is a fortified barracks for people to stay near the king. It is a place of like a city within a city. It's kind of set up over Granada, up kind of towards a higher elevation, kind of overlooking Granada. So where you would want a fortified palace to be, right? A place that you could look down, you could see enemies. It was full of booby traps, right? So that if people tried to overtake part of the Alhambra, they could kind of cut off that part. And it has these giant walls that are crenellated. We talked about crenellation, right? That kind of block at the top that we typically see in a castle. And then what do the Christians do once Charles V and they finally take over this side, even though it was so well fortified, right? The Christians take over. Well, they build a palace right in the center, okay? Because that's what people do. It's rude, but that's what people do. So this means Red Fort. That's why it's called the Alhambra, Red Fort. The most important palace within this fortified city or fortified palace is the Palace of the Lions. That's the one that College Board wants you to know about. The palace is lined up on the east-west axis. Water is very important here at the palace because not only is it providing a sustenance for the city, right, the Alhambra, but it's a symbol of purity. It's a symbol of paradise. It makes different rituals possible. It muffles conversations. It shows wealth and extravagance. And so very, very important to have water and water access here. These really ornate filigree kind of stonework. Delicate, I would say something about delicate columns. And then it has the Fountain of the Lions in the middle. Remember, the Fountain of the Lions somehow crazy was set up so that the lions would each spray water out of their mouth for 1 hour. And so it went around kind of, and you could kind of tell time by which lion was spitting water out of its mouth. So they have a very advanced hydraulic system. This is what we call the Charbagh layout. The Charbagh layout, it's CHARBAHG or GH, I can't remember, but it's the same layout we see. Well, we didn't get to talk about the Taj Mahal. It's in Content Area 7, but it's the same layout of the gardens at the Taj Mahal. So it aligns with the cardinal points. It's to give this idea of harmony by supporting and depicting all parts. Okay, so it's like it's unified. And all of this, now that it's stone now, but this was all filled in with flowers originally. There I am, and you can see they filled it in with marble. Very exciting. I took these pictures. These are different calligraphy within the palace. Again, it says, like, I think 9,000 something times within the palace, it says only God is victorious. So it's reminding them of the importance of Allah. Lots of intricate stonework, woodwork, ceramic work. It is just over the top ornate. There we are. There's Zimmerman. Importance of water. And then this is within the palace of Charles V. He built a classical looking Roman space within the Alhambra. Okay, after the Moors fell. We talked about maquarnas. Y'all know I love the maquarnas. Those are kind of the 3D elements that hang from the roof or the ceiling. So there's our floor plan. Remember, College Board could give you guys the floor plan and wants you to be able to recognize it. So this is built on kind of a high elevation. It's multiple acres of spaces for different purposes. So residences, barracks, city center, all that built within this space. I would say rectilinear forms, fortified. Mosque of Selim the second. This is in Turkey. It is a Ottoman mosque that was built to be the better version of the Hagia Sophia, right? So I think about this one as like being the Hagia Sophia 2.0. Edirne was one of Selim II's favorite cities. And remember, there was already a huge mosque in Constantinople, or Istanbul. So it wouldn't have made any sense to build there. And so he had Sinan, the great architect, build this structure to resemble but surpass the Hagia Sophia in the town where he had done some scholarly training as a young man. So you could talk, ooh, what if you got continuity and change, right? Remember, College Board calls it continuity instead of tradition, whatever. And you talked about the form here, and you could talk about the dome, right? And how that's changed over time. That would be delightful. We talked about this being on squinches, whereas the Hagia Sophia was on pendentives. The messages within the Mosque of Selim II are all about the differences between Christianity and Islam. They're highlighting those differences. It's still a fenestrated dome, very decorative interior. Again, these PowerPoints are shared with y'all. The Mosque of Selim II also had madrasa, which are universities, and the shops. The shops, remember, were just for Muslims. And so it's a city center in addition to being a place of worship. Influence of the Turkish blue, cobalt blue, which was also popular in South Asia and China. All right, so that is it for 3A. We're going to start 3B here, and we're going to jump into the Northern Wren. Sorry, I'm not a professional video maker. I'm doing the best I can. Just getting you guys the info. All right, so we're still within content area 3, remember? So early Europe, colonial America. So some of the things we're going to be talking about. Again, I would suggest flipping through this stuff in either your notes or Google Slides. So first we're going to be in the Northern Renaissance. So again, this is review 5, Islam and the Northern Renaissance. And then I'll put the Renaissance in its own review section. Northern Renaissance, what do we expect? Tons of details, right? An emphasis on surface, an emphasis on texture, materialism, decorative qualities of painting. This is where oil paint comes alive. Tons and tons of symbols, technically excellent and smaller work than Italy. Northern Renaissance. It's a wonderful piece. What if y'all got an FRQ about the Annunciation triptych Marode altarpiece? You would kill it. It would be great. So y'all know I love this piece. This piece shows that story of the Annunciation when the angel Gabriel appears to Mary, who's a virgin, and says, "You're having a baby. The baby's Jesus." And Mary's like, "But I'm a virgin." And the angel says, "I know." And this is God's son. And that's that miraculous story. And so this is Gabriel, and he's like just about to get Mary's attention. And Mary's reading a book on the floor, as you do. And Gabriel's about to speak with her. So Gabriel's here, he's in blue, and Mary's in red. Again, the vibrancy of this color is showing us that it's oil paint. It's showing us that's an innovation, right? The perspective here, it's not perfect. It's wonky, but it's an innovation to have that much realism. And then remember, this is the one where Jesus is flying in. He's going to zip in. He's going to hit Mary in the uterus, and she's going to be pregnant, okay? These people on the side, those are the donors, remember? So they're watching this story happen. This would go in their home. A triptych, it's going to fold in on itself. So this would go in their home as a sacred place for veneration. And then Joseph is the old man over here. He's a carpenter, just working on building a mousetrap, as you do. Here's baby Jesus. Jesus being born to die, according to this interpretation of the Christian faith. And so he's zipping in through the window, carrying his cross. So he's about to be conceived, but he's already thinking about his death. Lots of specificity here, and everything from the little faces on the teapot to the jewels in Gabriel's headband. I mean, everything here is just so specific, and that's what we expect from the Northern Renaissance. The specificity was supposed to, one, let people know that their rich people had this made and it's important and it took a lot of time and effort, but it was also supposed to remind the audience that this is a true story. Tons of symbols, right? The Trinity, Christ's presence here. It's open to the book of John, telling the story of the Annunciation, Jewish prayer shawl, the pitcher's upright, right, which speaks to Mary's virginity. And then the mousetrap speaks to the cross, being the trap for sin. There's our very, very pious patrons. And Mary is oblivious to the fact she's about to be pregnant. It's small-ish because, again, it's meant to go in a home. Let's see. Arnolfini portrait. All right, so this work is not really religious necessarily, although it does have Christian undertones. So with the Arnolfini portrait, Jan van Eyck, we talked about, again, specificity, detail, symbols, perspective, and attention to texture. So the fur versus the velvet versus the wood floor versus the puppy dog, right? You see all these different textures coming together. This, we don't know what it is. It's not a wedding. It's probably some sort of betrothal or ceremony that has to do with their relationship, or some people suppose could be a business deal. And then in that convex mirror in the back, you have the scene repeated. This shows extreme excellence and specificity because these are so tiny. The life of Christ around the mirror. All right, so context for Northern Renaissance. This is a time period of great change. This is going to be in the North, where the Protestant Reformation is going to be born and bloom, and it's going to slowly have its influence down on Rome, right? But that takes a while because we're up in the North here. So Martin Luther, the printing press, printmaking, oil paint, Adam and Eve by Dürer, Albrecht Dürer, which hopefully you can tell by his name and remember that he is German. This is an engraving. An engraving gives you more details, many more details than a woodcut. We talked about this being so classical and him being very, very influenced by Da Vinci and Vitruvius and their ideas of proportion. The figures are in contrapposto. They're very classical. Instead of setting it in the Tigris and the Euphrates, right, where the Garden of Eden would have been located in the Mesopotamian Fertile Crescent, he sets it in a German wood. And so it has that local flavor. We talked about all the symbols here. The animals relate to the idea of the four humors of the body. We talked about that. Remember, this is a giant piece. The Eisenheim altarpiece. Matthias Grunewald. Matthias Grunewald. He is he's typical Northern in his use of oil paint, in his use of extreme detail, symbolism, painting on wood. That's all very typical. The thing that is atypical for a Northern piece about this work is how large it is, right? Usually, pieces from the North are smaller. The reason this work is so large, remember, it was made for a chapel in a hospital for many people to be able to see. And it was a hospital that dealt with, remember, ergotism, that fungal, essentially food poisoning that was killing people, and they nicknamed ergotism St. Anthony's fire because it caused the person who was infected to feel like they were burning, to hallucinate, to get these horrible sores on their skin. And so this work is custom made to deal with that plague, right, that outbreak. It's kind of interesting. I mean, you know, we're living through a pandemic, to think about what a work would look like that was made for COVID-19 patients, right? What if a work was made to specifically deal with the symptoms of COVID? Okay, so if there was a hospital that was only seeing COVID patients, right, and this was seen as a miracle object, a miraculous object, that would make sense. It would tie in there. And so it's kind of interesting to think about. His work, Grunewald's work, is usually kind of psychedelic looking. He has this dark nighttime crucifixion, which we know is not biblically accurate, but, you know, here we are. Vibrant red. Very macabre. Remember that word macabre? It's dark, disturbing. Mary's fainting to John's arms. Jesus is already showing some rigor mortis. He's showing some of the wounds on the skin that would have been typical of St. Anthony's fire or ergotism. And then this is the innermost part of the polyptych. Remember, it's called a polyptych because it has multiple parts. So the innermost part had the wood carving. This was done by another artist, Nicholas. And these are almost full-size wood carvings, right? They're almost the size of an average person. Gilded. This was only opened up, I believe, at Easter. It was only opened up all the way. Some of the more psychedelic scenes of this polyptych. So remember, we looked at a triptych, 3 parts. This is polyptych, multiple parts. Love the resurrection scene. Very, very groovy looking. Loading. What? We'll never know what was there. St. Anthony's Torment. All right. So Lucas Cranach. He is a Reformation artist, meaning he is coming out of he was actually a friend of Martin Luther, and he's coming out of this mentality that Catholics are bad. I'm not saying that, but that's what the Reformists were saying, the Protestants were saying. And so this is going to be a German work, The Allegory of Law and Grace. and it's supposed to show how the Protestant faith is better than Catholicism. And so on one side you have law, and law is the bad side. Law is the Catholic side. Again, not my viewpoints, just theirs. And so you have Adam and Eve, which is sin. You have Judge Jesus separated from everyone else. You have Moses and the Ten Commandments. You have death. You have the devil, and you have man being stabbed in the butt towards hell. And you have a dead tree. And then you go to the grace side, right? The Protestant side. And you have man being blessed by the Holy Spirit and the blood of Jesus and his sacrifice. You have John the Baptist. You have the resurrection of Jesus trampling death and the devil. You have the holy city of Jerusalem and Jesus with you. As opposed to isolated up in the heavens. So this was propaganda. This was propaganda that was given out as kind of a pictorial reminder. Even if you couldn't read, right, you could look at these images and tell which side is preferable to the other side. So woodcut, notice, woodcut is going to be less refined than the engraving we saw with Durer. Oh dear. All right, then we talked about Proto-Renaissance. Aha, I made it. Okay, so Islam and Northern Renaissance was review 5. We'll pick up with the next review after I charge my computer with the Renaissance. So we're just moving right through.